Hi, everybody. This is Ukraine, Voices from Within. So once again, we gather here, myself, Anna Sazanov, with me, my cousin, Maxim Panchenko, with both Ukrainians. I'm right now in the US. Maxim is right now in Kiev. And we're here to bring you different voices from Ukraine, but not Ukrainian voices, voices of people from all over the world that decided to join the war and to make an impact on the war in Ukraine and also the rest of the world. So our guest today is a very interesting one, and I had the pleasure to meet him on my recent trip to Ukraine. I just picked up a random volunteer and I gave him a ride from Western Ukraine to Kiev. And we spent about 4 hours in the car driving, and I got to learn a little bit more why he's in Ukraine, why he joined the effort, and why he came literally from paradise to hell. And why paradise? Because our guest coming all the way from Hawaii, from the United States, all the way to the hell of the war in Ukraine. So Kevin, hello, and welcome to our podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
For sure. And Max, again, hello.
How's Hi. It going? Hello to everybody.
And both of you guys right now in Kiev, recording this podcast from one of the offices that does have electricity, because again, there are blackouts right now in Ukraine. So first of all, Max, how's the vibe right now in Kiev? Share with us a little bit.
Well, it's pretty much the same as it was during our previous recording, because of the winter being in its midst. There are problems with the temperature that impact the amount of time where they don't have electricity. So it's kind of the same story because we have outages every day. But security-wise, it's better than it used to be. There are no shellings, or at least not that frequent. Even though this cannot be said about every point on the map of Ukraine, because as most of the world knows and saw the footages, there was this big tragedy in Dnipro, when a residential building was hit. So there is still war around, but Kyiv is holding on.
For now. And again, whenever somebody asks me, okay, how's your parents? What's going on? Because my parents are in Ukraine right now, on the western side of Ukraine. And I all the time tell them, like, every day is a new day. Every day can bring with it some terror or good news. Like, we don't know. So knock on wood that today was good, but tomorrow it's a mystery. So I think like the Ukrainian people and the country itself shows a lot of resiliency and kind of like adapting to this new world under a war and this threat, but we're still going on, right?
Yes. And way to go, I'd say.
Yeah.
Of how most people think about it, it's going to be like for maybe up to another year.
Yeah.
So
it's well and lively here in Kiev. I mean, it's well and lively everywhere, honestly, besides like frontline villages. So hasn't been too bad in Kiev.
Well, there comes a point when people, and this is, by the way, very similar to how things happened, I think, in 2014, 2015, given the difference in the scope of things, of course. But it feels like people are adjusting, and it feels like businesses are adjusting, and the life is adjusting. Like Ukrainians are learning to live under this, constant circumstances. So yes.
So Kevin, let's ask you the first question. And before we talk about your why and why you're in Ukraine, I'm just like curious to hear what you thought Ukraine is going to be like before you crossed the border and after being in Ukraine. And you had the opportunity to be from east to west, from north to south, to many parts of Ukraine that I never been to. So kind of like share what you thought Ukraine is going to be like, and what you met, like you came to Ukraine and then you saw something different, or it's not different. This is what you expected to see.
Well, in any good fashion, let's start with politics. Basically, I didn't trust the news at any point during the beginning of Ukraine because of all of the lies that had been previously told by the news. And so like when I first came here, I had no idea what to expect. Like it could be a full-blown invasion as it was, or it could be, nothing. because, I'm halfway around the world, and like my only contact to Ukraine was news and social media, and some of the footage that originally was coming out, few and far between, I later found out was like from 2014. And so I wasn't sure what scale of invasion was happening because I have no ties here. And so when I first got here, I was like, oh, like, we'll see. And then I got to Poland, and then like, you could see the refugee crisis and the millions of people, and like, everyone helping and all that good stuff. And then, yeah, when I first came in, like, you hear the news and it's like, oh, like, it's a full scale invasion. I first came in like March, beginning of March. It was like the 15th or something I came in, somewhere around then. And I went to Lviv, which is only an hour inside of Kiev. And, I was with my friend and a Ukrainian driver, and like taking pictures, and like was like, oh, like war zone, blah, blah, blah. But, and like, thought it was going to be all nuts. And like, sure, it was like one of the two times that Lviv got hit by rockets. So like the morning that I went, or the afternoon I went, the morning before, it had actually gotten hit by rockets. And so that was a less common thing. And so I was worried about it at first, but now coming into the country further and further, it progressively is like, oh, like this is fine. And then I first came to Kiev, and like Kiev was empty and desolate. Not desolate, but like empty. There was no people. It was kind of a big city that was quiet, which was really interesting in a way that I hadn't seen before. That was back in March, April, probably May. I started coming into Kiev, and it was empty.
And also dark, because there was electricity as compared to now, but because of this light masking, it was like kind of vicious looking, because people tried to mask and everything was dark.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so came in and I was like, oh, I'm only gonna go to Kiev, and then, or I was only like, I'm only gonna go to Lviv, I'm only gonna go to Kiev. I went to Kharkiv in May, and I was like, oh, like, that was like, that was still in the time when Kharkiv was getting shelled rather than rocketed, because it was close. The Russians were close enough to Kharkiv to actually like lob artillery into the city. So it was a little more dangerous then. And then shortly after that, I got invited to some extent to go to Bakhmut and later Lysychansk, which was, Lysychansk is now Russian held. We drove, that was a whole adventure in itself. So yeah, no, it's my expectations of it were, I had no idea what to expect. I've never been to a war zone. I've never been to Europe. I innately don't trust the news. So yeah, I just kind of took it as it was and was precautious about it. But yeah, just came in to see what it was. But yeah, I don't know. I'd say that now, like, minus the rockets, and sure, I'm jaded. I've been here for 9 months and like, been a couple 100 meters from like the most well-trained Russians in the war effort in the hottest place on the planet right now. But like, more or less the country is safe within the exemption of like the frontline area. Like, sure, you can totally get hit by a missile any day of the week, but there's nothing you can do about it. So it's just like saying your piece with death and like living your life as it is. So
why you're in Ukraine? Like you shared with me a little bit of the fun time that you have in Hawaii, and literally people refer to it as paradise on earth. Yeah. And you chose to travel across the world to be in hell. And again, you've been in Bakhmut. You were very close to the front lines, to the Russians, and every day we hear about different volunteers that getting killed or kidnapped, and people don't even know about that. And you've seen hell.
No, I haven't been in the trenches. Like, sure, what I've seen is messed up and, hell to some extent, but like the trenches are a whole different scale of hell. Like, I walk around on flat-ish ground that's not covered in mud, and I'm not freezing cold. and neither are the people that are walking around in the areas that I'm in generally. But like the trenches is something else. Like fighting in buildings is one thing, and it has it poses its own risk and all that. But like sitting in a trench where your feet are like ankle deep in freezing cold mud, and then that mud freezes on you, and you're getting shelled and like have to watch out for an ambush all the time. That's hell. And no, I haven't seen that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's life here. I don't know. The reason that I came here is just very simply the fact that my stepdad's like, hey, do you want to go to Poland and volunteer for 5 days? And he would pop my trip to Europe. Like I'm no hero. I'm just, a motherfucker with a van. So
again, those 5 days extended into 9 months. And when we met, it was, I don't know, 5 months ago. You were saying like, yeah, I'm almost done and I'll be back. I'm going back to the US. And once again, you step in another step and continue to be involved with this war. When you can be living in privileged America, sipping your latte or Chardonnay, that's how I refer to it, and enjoying life. And,
the thing that you mentioned about those 5 days, it seems, knowing about you a couple of, things now, after we have been acquainted, you now, in what you do, seem to be so very far from, those 5 days of volunteering in Poland. So can you elaborate a bit on on your journey here already in Ukraine, like what you have been involved with, what have you been doing, together with whom, and in which particular ways do you help Ukrainians?
Yeah, I mean, I went from there. I made connections there to a group of guys that wanted to keep helping Ukraine, because the problem that we were having is that the Polish aid drop points that all of the European countries were bringing stuff to were questionable at best, and everything else would be speculative and claims at that point. But yeah, there's a lot of questions of where that aid actually ended up, and even with proper documentation from both the Ukrainian and the Polish side, you weren't able to get aid from them, which they claimed that was the criteria. And then started working with a group of guys. Initially it seemed like a good thing, and then I kind of realized it was and so I met other people and worked with them. And
when you say work, can you a little bit elaborate?
We would collect supplies, and we would send it from the Polish border into Ukraine to different contacts that we had. And then we basically would gather aid on the Polish border and then send drivers over. And then I started working for another group or with them and driving aid into Lviv, Kiev. Eventually, that was when I did Kharkiv. And then in the process of that, while I was with the first group, I made contacts with another group of volunteers that were doing refugee transport across Europe. And so they asked me if I would, we did a couple runs to Germany and drop people off in Germany to start their lives there, and then drove back into Poland. And then they asked if I would take them to London with them. And so I drove to London and did that. And then eventually they're like, hey, we're going to start closing up shop, but we'd love to help you get a van or something like that. So they helped me get my first van. And after them and after the other organization, I had built a number of contacts from different organization NGOs. And I basically drove for whoever would cover fuel, and basically fuel was the only thing that was included, but sometimes they do put me in a place to stay or feed me or whatever. And then I started working for an American organization who was super well funded, but had absolutely no idea what they were doing. And the first run that they had me do was one of the more questionable drops that I had done. I kind of knew from the get-go, the guy was sketch. He wouldn't give me any documentation. He wouldn't give me any paperwork, nothing to say that he was who he says he was, or anything was going to the right place. And so I was super hesitant about it. And then they're use your best judgment. And so I would have given him nothing. I would have just ghosted the guy, but they wanted me to give him something. And so we gave him some of the less important meds. And then I took the rest of the meds from them and gave it to people that I knew that would actually use it well on their request. And then I worked for them for 3 months, and they took pretty good care of me, as I did they, because they had no one on the ground whatsoever. And so they basically were just trying to trust people. And, be it as it may, like there's a lot of good people here, but there's a lot of people that aren't here for the right reasons. Trust is a complicated thing here. And so I helped them set up I basically did all of their logistics and aid runs, Sylviansk, Bakhmut, Kharkiv, all over. And we did a lot of good work. They would basically cover my fuel and the expenses and do runs. And it would basically be a joint operation with whoever was providing aid and them for covering fuel. Because usually in the beginning here, at least, someone will have aid, but they don't have money for fuel. And if you're lucky, you'll find someone that has money for fuel and team up. Everybody brings a small piece of the pie, and it's still how it is to some extent. But a lot of the larger INGOs, international organizations, basically are coming in and filling those voids entirely, at least in the less dangerous areas. Obviously, the danger areas are still, and to my understanding, kind of forever meaning the end of the war, will be run by smaller organizations. So, yeah.
And I want to touch the point that you made about trust. And I think one of the things that, correct me if I'm wrong, you learned during your time in Ukraine is who to trust and who not to trust.
Yep.
And when I met Kevin, I found myself 6 or 7 hours after that on the front lines, very close to the Russians providing humanitarian aid. And literally, I trusted Kevin based on all the information that he shared with me before that. And he gained a lot of connections and kind of did the legwork before that, who to trust and who not to trust. And I trusted him in the operation that he ran. And we were very close to the Russians, providing humanitarian aid and feeding people that were disconnected from the world for at least 7 months. And during that moment, I remember you operated the whole chaos that was there. And again, there was another security team there, and we evacuated a family with us. It was in the middle of the night, and we were a target for the Russians. And that was, I think that moment was the definition of trust, for me at least. And you learn that in the hard way for about 9 months. You're 9 months in Ukraine, who to trust, who not to trust. And if you find somebody to trust, you stick with them. And you helped me also to learn a lot of things about Ukraine, the darker things about Ukraine that I didn't know, and when to use my Ukrainian card and when not to use a Ukrainian card. So, yeah, trust is a big thing. And that kind of lead me to the next question. Do you think...
Let me touch on that. I'd say there's probably 5 people here that I trust. There's different levels of trust. There's people you work with and that you trust to do a certain thing. But there's in Hawaii, we have a saying, pono, do the right thing when no one's looking. And there's, a handful or a dozen people in this country that I think would do the right thing when no one's looking, that I would put my, I'd give them $10,000 and let them hold it, kind of thing. But there's people that you work with and I'll trust you to not get me killed, but I wouldn't give you my girlfriend or $10,000 kind of thing. So there's varying degrees of trust. And at the end of the day, it's come a long way from where it used to be. Ukraine has. It's come a long way in trust and how the country is built and how many people are honest. And I've seen that even in the time that I've been here and can see the old roots. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the same could be said for anywhere in the world as far as trust goes. But yeah, maybe it's more of a world societal crisis than a Ukraine thing. I mean, sure. Yeah, there is more corruption here than in other places, but also you're 30 years old from a free liberated country from being previously Soviet. So like, I think that it's developed faster than anywhere else I would have imagined it would. So,
but do you feel like this trust issue, does it stem from the character of Ukrainians, or is it dictated by the conditions of the war? Are people afraid of the war and lost in the war, and that is why they are not trustworthy or trusting? Or is it about, inherently about people?
I guess I would make the differentiation at like Ukrainians and like old Soviet people. Because like I've talked about it with a couple of Ukrainians actually that like speak really good English. And one of the things that like was explained to me and makes a lot of sense is like, 40 years ago, you were standing in a bread line fighting to get food. And if you didn't like fight to get food, you might not get any. And that's been deeply rooted in the culture for a long time. And because of that, people feel that like if they don't go and get theirs, they're not going to get it. They feel that like, people won't look after them, at least the older generation. The younger generation is much more westernized, or maybe not more westernized. I mean, sure, some of them are, but I wouldn't attribute like honesty and looking after others to a Western society because it's not true. But the younger generations look after one another more so than some of the older generations. Some of the older generations, the babushkas, are amazing and they look after everyone and blah, blah. But some of them still have the Soviet mentality where it's like, if I don't get mine, like I won't get anything and no one will look after me and blah, blah. And so you have to fight for it. I do think your other point of it being a war is also another part of it. And so I think the two of those in conjunction and other variables that I don't understand are probably the reason for that. So, it's...
Max, what do you think? You've been analyzing Ukraine and kind of presenting it also to the Western world. And you were born after Soviet Union collapse. I still remember my days in the Soviet Union, praying for the flag and the glory of Soviet Union, and kind of you were born after. And I think, Kevin, you're right. There is like a different generational difference. And like I see it also in my family, and Max, you probably see it in your family as well. But like from analytic perspective.
Yeah, that's true. You see many developments in Ukraine and many conclusions that can be made about Ukraine. They are values driven. And there have been several different stages, several different events during the 30 years that Kevin has mentioned of Ukraine's modern history that to different extents displayed this, this values being the cornerstone of everything here in Ukraine. And so we've had not two, but three revolutions. Most people think that we've had two, but there was this revolution on granite, as they said. Revoluция на граніті, because of the, it was in the city center, and well, that's a complicated story. But it was like a student movement.
What year it was?
I think it was 1991. So it was, but it was a student movement. And it was a minority. Then we've had this Orange Revolution, 2004. That was like a much more grassroots thing. It was the first very big, in terms of the modern history of Ukraine, very big protest of Ukrainians against the value-based protest against corruption and against, this Soviet-style mentality rooted in, again, corruption, rooted in nepotism and everything. And then, even though the revolution was successful, like, things then downshifted, and we once again had a Russian president who again whose values were rooted in this nepotism and everything and corruption from 2010 to 2014. But the biggest and the most recent of these developments is the Revolution of Dignity, and that was like the overwhelming thing in terms of its impact, in terms of how the voice was heard, the voice of Ukrainians. Like, we have different political values, and this is, by the way. The thing is, when foreigners want to know about the difference of Ukrainians from other Slavic peoples, especially from Russians, what's the difference between you and Russia, because your languages are so similar and your histories, so tied
Intertwined.
together. Yes. So the first thing that comes to mind is that there is this great difference in political values. Like, as commonplace as it sometimes may sound, the things of freedom and the things like Western values, the human dignity and everything, or the things following up on what Kevin said that are accepted to be attributed, to the West, stereotypically. That's what defines Ukrainians. And my point being here is that indeed, as Kevin said, people that made these revolutions happen, they like at this point in time, I think like these people are 45 and less, because even if the older generation is not extremely pro-Soviet or something, they are mostly indifferent. They are like, they will go whichever way you show them. So yes, there is this divide.
And I think, go ahead.
I think the other thing too is, like, for me, the majority of like contact that I have with people outside of Kiev and Dnipro, where I spend like, off operation time and like logistics and admin time, is all in frontline, more or less pro-Russian neighborhoods, for the reason that, like, the people that don't want Russia and aren't, mentally inept, have left. Like, anyone that like has half a brain has been like, yeah, I don't want to get hit by a rocket. Well, maybe not a rocket. I don't want to get hit by artillery or a tank shell, or like, have the bad things that the Russians do to people. And sure, like, technically there are some Russian units that aren't horrible, but there are some Russian units that are horrible, genocidal. And so, like, I'm not going to play 50-50 with which Russian unit comes through my town and like, oh, yeah, they're fine, or oh, yeah, I'm going to die. So, like, most of the people that I deal with are generally an older generation, lived under USSR, and it's generally smaller towns that we focus on, because the larger towns get a bunch of aid and blah, blah, blah. And so, you come to Kiev and it looks like, I've never been to Prague, but what I would imagine Prague looking like, or another like Slavic country, but has been, westernized and enjoys their freedom, which is why I differentiated between like a Soviet generation mentality and the Ukrainian, because like they are very different. And most of the people that I deal with are of more of a Soviet generational ideology than a Ukrainian one, just because a lot of the Ukrainians are very keen to adopt the support of the West. Not necessarily, in my experience, because like they want to be the West. Some of them do, but that they want the insurance that comes with becoming a part of the West, so that they get their freedoms, or they get more freedom than they had.
And I think you bring a very good point. There is a geographical differences as well. Like, take Kiev West, it was always pro-Ukraine, freedom, democracy in the West. And Kiev East, and again, it's very broad kind of like cut that I'm doing, there were more pro-Russians. And I think the war also got people to change their opinions and to be more pro-Ukrainian, no matter where you are. But there are still some rooted thinking to many of them, especially in the small villages. And even when we went to the run in the front lines around the Izum area, we had some villages that we couldn't go to because they were very pro-Russian. And we knew that if we're going to go there, we might not survive the ride.
Well, actually, I found out later that we drove through a pro-Russian neighborhood. So, yeah.
Fun. That's fun. I have a question for you, Kevin. Do you think that the war changed you? And if so, how?
For me, like, I've always wanted to test myself. And so, up until very recently, like, I was going to stop the HA and fight. But one of my buddies said something profound to me, and like, he's fought and been to wars across the world and all that good stuff. And we were just like driving back casually from dinner and talking about war. And like, it's fun. And like, if you don't think war is fun, you've never been to war. But one of the things that he said is it's war's all fun and games until you have to drag your half dead friend or dead friend down the road. And like, it kind of clicked for me that like, I've tested myself. Like, I understand why war is so addicting. Like, it's exhilarating. It's the most exhilarating thing in life. And I see why veterans of combat tours, because combat veterans and veterans are night and day different. Actual combat, not like, oh, someone shot over my head and I pooped myself. It is thoroughly exhilarating. It is the most alive feeling that there is. And yeah, after he said that, like, I kind of realized, like, I recently had some, like, I don't know, they were probably close calls. Nothing happened. So, like, I don't know how close they were, but like, best case scenario was like 450 meters line of sight from like Wagner and VDV and all that shit, or whatever the paramilitary Russian group is called. Line of sight. The only thing moving in Bakhmut at the time on the top of a ridgeline is a silver SUV. Yeah, no, we should be dead. And so after that, like, I kind of like, he said that like a week later, and I kind of realized, I was like, yeah, like, you know what? I have tested myself. Like, I don't need to like continue to push the envelope to like end up like another name on a fucking casket. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's war. Like, of course it changes you. And like, it made me a lot more empathetic for combat veterans. And I do make a differentiation because like, there are so many veterans, and I'll get hate for this, but like, that's the truth, that like, they've gone to like Afghanistan and they sit in a logistics base and they do nothing. And then they like say that they're a vet and think that they know everything about the war and blah, blah. And then like, oh yeah, like I'm going to go to Ukraine and fight. And then they come here and then like, they're more afraid than I am. And like, I'm just a shithead with a van. So it's war. Of course it changes you. And I don't know, I guess for me, like, it makes me realize that like, well, I was kind of already in this boat, but it solidifies my ideology. It was like, if you want to change the world, like, fix yourself, fix your family, fix your community, like, fix your backyard first. If you want to impact the world, start small and fix what you have control over and what you know. Like, I've never asked people for money to send it here, for the reason in the beginning of I had nowhere useful to send it. Now I have somewhere useful to send it, but like, and know that it will get used well. But like, trust is a big thing. And like, if you don't know people where you're sending money, like if you don't know who you're sending money to, or if you can't see that they're overtly honest and you can see all of their finances and how the money's spent, actually like really see it, like, I wouldn't send money to people, and nor will I ask. Like, I'll ask people for money now that I work for a good organization that actually does something that like I can get behind. But like, I would never, ever donate to a large organization. They waste money like no one's business. And sure, they make a large impact on a large scale. And it's harder to find small organizations that do the right thing. But it's small, it's efficient. And, the organization that I work for, people are from here. They live here. This is their life. They're fighting for their country and their freedom. And so they're less incentivized to just pocket the money and dip, because like, they care about the place. Like, it's their neighbors, it's their families, they're fighting for their freedom. It's not just like, oh yeah, like I'm just hop up and move. And like, a lot of people don't consider that. Like, don't get me wrong, I get the whole US perspective, and I don't know how I feel about like us being forced to send tax dollars here. But it's also something to consider is if this was your backyard and you were a small country that had, more or less no military power to begin with, you would want anything and everything that you could get help-wise to fight for your freedom. And it's just like life. People don't put themselves in other people's shoes, and they don't try to understand the perspective. They just be like, oh yeah, like the news told me this, so I'm going to believe it. Like, they don't really think for themselves and be like, yeah, like I would want help if I was, most people didn't know where Ukraine was before the war started. I know just because I'm really good at geography, but I knew nothing more than where it was. And so, yeah, I think that like, put yourself in other people's shoes. Don't jump to conclusions so much.
So maybe wrapping this up a little bit to more, to broader conclusions. What is the message that you would like it most useful to share with the world about Ukraine at this stage, in terms of helping Ukrainians, in terms of communicating what Ukraine actually is to the world, why it matters, why the world should care about Ukraine, how Ukraine's security and the world wants are interconnected. Like, what are your thoughts about this? What do you think the world should know?
I used to be of the belief that, like, for example, like the U.S. foreign policy should just be mind its own business. And like, sure, to some extent, well, a lot of extent, I still think it's true. But since we are the world superpower, if we allow other countries to invade other countries, as much as, yes, sure, maybe it shouldn't be our responsibility, but it is the seat that we sit in for now. And so if we allow other countries to invade other countries with no repercussions, it sets a precedent for everywhere else. And there are plenty of other places across the world that would love to invade. And realistically, a big part of the reason why they don't is they expect us to come and tear shit up. And so if we sit idly by on this, sure, yeah, I understand the reason why we have to use Ukraine as a proxy war. If we were in an all-out engagement with Russia, that changes the name of the game. Sure, Russia could just easily drop a tactical nuke on Kiev or in the battlefield somewhere and drastically change the situation. But so far, it's a game of, we want to destroy you without, destroying the world. And so, yeah, I think that there is an important role that we play, regardless of whether we want it or not, in the world's relationships with one another, at least for the time being. So that's my thoughts on aiding Ukraine. People's lives are complicated and they have a lot to manage and maintain. But if helping other people is something that you want to do, and I think that most people find greatest purpose and fulfillment through serving others. I know I do. And generally, when my friends, say they don't know what they want to do in life, I would recommend serving others in some way that you feel capable and fulfilled in. I would find good organizations that actually make an impact that aren't large necessarily. Like, it can be a medium-sized organization. It shouldn't be a large organization. It should be something that you can get behind and see a face to the company rather than see, just a big corporate superstructure. You should look for individuality in the organizations that you support and do some amount of research to them. And depending on the organization, I don't know enough about the structure, but seeing where their money gets spent is always a sign of goodness, and seeing their results. So as far as Ukraine goes, I mean, it's like there's little kids getting hit by rockets. It's pretty simple. It's our focus should be to end the war, but it can't be with a resolution of giving up land and space, because it sets a precedent that Russia will just continue. And, we'll get into U.S. foreign policy, and that would be, if we have a proxy war with Russia, it will slowly crumble and no longer be a problem for the rest of its illegally occupied colonies.
Well said. As we share always, keep Ukraine in your minds, hearts, and actions. I know, to kind of not be, this is one of the questions that many people ask me, what can we do to help? And I tell them, listen, as you shared, donate to an organization, at least for now. If you want to go and visit a war zone, you're more than welcome. And there is a lot of people that will be happy to guide you in Ukraine. But there is a lot of work ahead of us. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. We don't know when the war is going to end. And there is a lot of rebuilding to do and investment in Ukraine, because Ukraine has a lot to offer to the world. And there is a lot to do to help. It's not the end. Any final thoughts?
Just if you feel like helping, help.
Max, any final thoughts?
I mean, I just like the way in which we wrapped up our conversation about the messages about what Kevin said, that how everything is interconnected with the role of the US, and how maybe there is no direct, straight to the point need to get embroiled, but there is this moral side of the issue. There is this, not an obligation, but like a
Moral obligation.
an assumption of what the US should do and the West should do, being in the position it is in. So I think that's like the message about the right values we need as a receiving party of the story. Ukraine, that would be useful.
I will take it also like bigger. It's not only the US, it's the West. And whoever believes in democracy and freedom, this is our responsibility to make a change, to make a difference. Because Kevin, as you shared correctly, like this is going to impact other countries to do or not to do. And I feel like we're not really learning from history, because we've been in the same situation 80 years ago, and nobody really stopped it on time. So here we go. Once again, we have a war on European soil and people questioning, should we help or we should not help? I think one of the biggest things that moved me is during our ride to the eastern side of Ukraine, I asked one of the volunteers why they're there. And he told me many people after World War II thought to themselves that it didn't do enough to help and to make a difference. And this person didn't want to have this feeling after. So this is why I'm contributing to make a difference. And this is, I think, both of you also here making a difference. And we're basically fighting for the entire democratic world and to the free world.
Amen.
Hallelujah. No, just kidding. Thank you so much, y'all. Be safe. Take care of yourself. Take care of others. And thank you to all our audience. Thank you for listening. This is Ukraine, Voices from Within. If you like it, share with others so more people will know what's happening right now in Ukraine.